exciting time to be involved in woodland conservation, not least because woodlands and trees are under pressure like never before, but also because it seems, well, certainly from Woodland Trust perspective, that more and more people are getting a new appreciation of the many benefits that woods and trees can provide and the solutions that they can potentially provide in sorting out some of our big challenges, things like the widespread loss of nature, and also this sort of disconnection with nature as well that I think we're seeing. The pending climate breakdown and all the consequences that that might lead to, and then also human health, as we just heard, and well-being, and how we live and eat and work and so on. So this has led to a plethora of calls for action around woods and trees, with things like planting for carbon sequestration, creation of nature recovery networks, and also sort of tackling tree health issues as well, and also the role of trees in new developments in terms of landscaping and health benefits. So I think it's vital that we assess what is happening with woods and trees and whether the actions that are being taken are actually achieving the right results and avoiding any kind of unintended consequences as well. So my talk is, I'll just quickly run through a bit about Woodland Trust and who we are and what we do, and then move on to a new project that it's kind of in the planning stage, so this presentation is more kind of questions than answers. And it's about looking at the state of the UK's woods and trees and how we can report on that on a more regular basis. And I'd absolutely welcome any ideas, because I know you all have like loads of data at your fingertips for what data we might use and how we might use it. So just who we are and what we do. In the top corner is our founder, Kenneth Watkins, who was based in Devon, in 1972 set up the Woodland Trust to protect one wood in Devon, and it kind of grew from there. And our vision now is for a UK rich in native woods and trees for people and wildlife. And we've got more members than we've ever had in the last sort of nearly 50 years now, so over 250,000 individual members. We also have thousands of volunteers who put in thousands of hours of volunteer time across a whole range of different disciplines. We also work in partnership with others regularly, and our annual income now is around 50 million a year, and 70% of that comes from donations and legacies. So it just shows you just how important woods and trees are to the people in the UK. Ourselves, we look after about 30,000 hectares of wooded habitats, and the work that we do involves campaigning to protect, action to restore, and the creation of new woodlands. And we're also trying to focus our activity a bit more at sort of landscape scale, treescapes obviously, areas across the UK. So the state of the UK's woods and trees, this is a new idea project that we've been kind of thinking about for a while. So it's to produce a definitive and trusted regular stock take to address specific policy questions primarily. But we want to use the results to, as I said, assess progress towards our mission, and also kind of influence policy and hold the government to account on its ambitions for woods and trees. We'd also want to use it to inform the public about the values, threats, pressures, progress and opportunities associated with woods and trees, and definitely to inspire positive action and not just collect more and more data, but actually use some of the amazing data that's out there to make a difference. So, as I say, our aim is to provide this kind of clear picture of where we're going with biodiversity and conservation, but also the social aspects of woods and trees, and the natural capital value of the UK's native woodland. And data, therefore, is required from a mix of disciplines, so environmental, social and economic, and that is definitely a challenge in pulling this all together, particularly across the UK, where the different countries of the UK have different ways of storing data and recording things, and different policies and so on. So it has been quite a challenge to try and think about that. So we've just completed a scoping study, which was actually undertaken for us by the World Conservation Monitoring Centre working with JNCC. That has involved reviewing 100 different data sets. Well, it was over 100 actually, but we kind of narrowed it down to 100, so you can see that there's a challenge to start with. And we assessed those against different criteria, so looking at kind of sampling frequency, the cost of the data, the accessibility to us, looking at geographical coverage, and also alignment against the themes that we were interested in looking at. We then undertook a sort of stakeholder survey and had a number of responses to that, about over 100 responses actually, asking people what kind of themes they'd be interested in tracking and recording. And these are the 4 themes that have come out most strongly, so kind of the extent of woods and trees and their wildlife value, the condition of them and the threats they face, the benefits they provide for people, and then some of the interventions that we're taking around creation and management and so on. So that study also involved a review of Earth observation data and how useful that might be for some of the questions that we have. And of course there is the fantastic National Forest Inventory that we're lucky enough to have in this country, which Ben obviously oversees. And that's open data, or a lot of it is, and it's looking at all woodlands over 0.5 per hectare. It also has a trees outside woodlands element as well. There's also the potential to analyse some of the Copernicus data, so the satellite data and looking at woodland cover, and that's obviously, well, we've got a question mark around whether Brexit and our exit from the EU might make a difference to the availability of that data and the cost of it to the UK. The Countryside Survey, which Lisa's already spoken about, which is a fantastic data set as well, and that's been kind of reprocessed, if you like, so that the older data can be compared alongside the newer data, and we'll get a better idea of change over time from that period. And then there's commercial satellite data, which is available in much finer resolution, but the cost of that is quite prohibitive at the moment. Certainly if you're doing a UK study, it might be possible to do something around different landscapes. So the study also looked at a review of the citizen science data that's out there. I'll just be very brief on that. So it's a key source of information on biodiversity, as we've already heard from different people. And obviously great use of volunteers collecting data. Some citizen science projects go into measuring things like pressures, which is really useful for us. So Woodland Trust actually organises the volunteers for the Observatory project, which is looking at early identification of tree health challenges, for example. But there's lots of others, so there's one about looking at lichens for pollution monitoring and so on. So there's potential to use citizen science data to fill some of the gaps that we've identified. But at the moment, we're finding we're lacking capacity to really analyse that data enough to guide robust decision making. So the next part of my talk, well, pretty much up to the end of it, in fact, I'm pleased to note, is just going through some of the priority questions that we've got around that we think would be useful to cover within a state of woods and trees reporting system. So the questions I've just highlighted in yellow, and some of these came through from the Stakeholder Survey. And then underneath that, any data that we think is probably the most likely data to help us to answer those questions. So the first one on extent and wildlife value, the big question is how is woodland canopy cover changing? And that's talking about woods, but also trees in the landscape and hedgerows. And there's lots of different ways we could do that. The NFI is certainly probably the go-to source of data on that, but also Blue Sky, which is a company which does aerial photography work, and that can be useful for identifying more individual trees outside woods. And then another big question on that is how important are different types of woodland for biodiversity, and that's where we think we need to integrate maps of different types of woodland cover against lots of the biodiversity data that's out there to see how the two interrelate. So for example, how good are conifer plantation areas compared with areas of native woodland, and what biodiversity do they support? Could literally talk for about an hour on most of these slides, but I'll just absolutely whiz through it. So condition and threats is the second theme, and what condition are native woodlands in? As an absolute gift to my presentation, a couple of weeks ago, Ben Ditchbone's NFI programme released their Woodland Ecological Condition data, which we've all been kind of hanging on waiting for about a long time anyway. And this is, I don't know how much you can see of this, but you can see here this goes through different aspects of woodland condition that you might measure and highlights how woods are doing. This was based on kind of 1 hectare sample plots all over the country, so there's thousands of these. I don't know, Ben, if you want to say how many thousand there are.
15,000 GB, 600.
There you go, 15,000 across the UK, or GB, sorry. So some of the issues that this picks out is we've got very few ancient trees, not much open space within woodlands, got lots of herbivore pressure up the top there, and not much dead wood at all. So there's certainly, this is great for pointing to kind of areas where we can try and improve woodland management and the way we look after our woods. Other data that might help with that would be the SSI condition data. Woodland Trust and National Trust also record condition data across their own estates. So another thing we're looking at is how is woodland biodiversity changing. And just as one example of some data, we're actually in a partnership with CEH and a number of other agencies to undertake a comprehensive resurvey of 130 ancient woodlands that were first surveyed 50 years ago. And this nicely the results of this will nicely coincide with the Woodland Trust 50th anniversary, so that's like a happy coincidence. This will give us much more detail than the NFI plots about whole woods and how things are changing in terms of response to climate change, tree health issues, pollution, and also deer browsing, which is obviously a big issue for woodland conservation. And the focus on that will be mainly on the plants and some soil data and lichens and so on, but we might want to think about building another taxa to that as well. So a big question that we've got, how are woods responding to climate change? Woodland Trust is lucky enough to be the keeper of Nature's Calendar, which is the UK's oldest citizen science project. I think some of the very first records are back from 1730s, which is amazing. So one of the things that picks up is phenology changes. So that's a huge project asking people to report things like the first signs of spring, the first leaf bud burst, and so on. It's very popular. Every year it's in the news for, bumblebees being spotted in December and so on. So but what you can see from this data, which unfortunately there's a gap in the middle when no one was actually looking after the data set, but Woodland Trust picked it up. I don't know if I got a pointer on here. Just in the 90s there, but you can see that this graph is called the Spring Index, and it's the number of days after, I think, the 21st of December, when spring first happens. So you can see that in the first line, it's quite a long time, it's about 125 days on average, and now it's about 115 days on average when the first signs of spring happen. So spring is 10 days earlier than it was in the first set of data there. The first figure is from 1890, if people can't see that. There's also a whole load of other data that we can use to look at condition and threats. So we also look at, for example, the threats to ancient woodland from development, and we have, sorry, I'm nearly done. Well, maybe not. I'll move on. Why don't I move on? So this lovely honeycomb map is all the parliamentary constituencies showing where accessible woodland is. So the darker colours indicate a greater percentage of the population live within easy access of accessible woodland. So that's woodland that you're allowed to go in as opposed to break into. But it's quite interesting because if you can see in the southeastern corner where there's actually a lot of woodland, there's less actually woodland that's accessible to people. So, and in the north where there's a bit less woodland in some cases, it's actually got greater access. So it's quite an interesting map. We use that with parliamentarians to try and get them to encourage greater woodland access. Carbon storage in woodland. Again, using some FC data showed that carbon stocks have increased over time, and the great statistic that 75% of all forest carbon is actually in the soil, not in the trees. Other ecosystem services that woodlands provide, again, another gift for my presentation, is the Natural Capital Atlas, just released by Natural England last week, I think, or a couple of weeks ago, and that's has a great chapter on how you might track changes in natural capital for woodlands as well, so we'll certainly be picking that up with Natural England. And the final theme is around kind of the interventions that we can make, so creation, management and restoration of woods. And one of the questions we've got there is how are woodland owners actually responding to the climate and biodiversity crises? What are they actually doing about it? And the British Woodland Survey, which is run by the Silver Foundation and contributed to by lots of other organisations, produced this infographic from the 2017 survey, which was asking woodland owners what they're doing about resilience and making their woods more resilient. So these are just some of the stats that they've come up with. So yeah, apparently a third of Scottish woodland owners are into rewilding, so that's all good news. Quickly move on. And then this is one that we've struggled with and would really welcome some help with, is are habitats becoming bigger and better connected, and what landscape configurations are most helpful? And it's really, there's so many things we could use to help that. There's something Lisa picked up as well in her presentation. It's something, you know, we have been struggling with, is what is the best data to use to answer those questions? And is all that landscape work actually helping the wildlife that lives there, and what are the time lags between new habitats being created and being occupied by wildlife? So any help, this is just some modelling work from the Northern Forest area, which was looking at where you might put different configurations of new woodland and how that might help people and wildlife. Great. Oh, I've got one more. Am I allowed? Okay, thank you. Very quickly, this is an important one on key data gaps. So things like tree species diversity from Earth observation data, that's something that we all seem to be struggling with. DEFRA have a big project running at the moment looking at ash and oak and whether that can be spotted and whether that pick up ash and oak diseases and so on. Genetic diversity within tree species, that's another area where we're missing a lot of data, and it could be useful in terms of thinking about adaptation to future conditions. Pollution, we covered a bit this morning, and I learned quite a lot about ammonia, thank you. Ancient trees, we have a register of ancient trees, which is contributed to by citizens all over the country, and it's very incomplete, so that is, you know, and we don't know really what the loss rates are of ancient trees, which are obviously, you know, a key biodiversity resource. Ancient woodland, we're working on a project with Natural England to update for England the ancient woodland inventory, because at the moment sites under 2 hectares aren't recorded on the inventory, and therefore they're subject to being destroyed without anyone ever knowing they were ancient woodland in the first place, which is sad. Landscape connectivity I've covered, and then one last thing, which was also released in the last week, it's unbelievable. Deer and grey squirrel distribution maps. I thought we didn't know anything about them, but in fact, this great paper has just come out in Ecology and Evolution, which combines observations and modelling data to produce maps of the different deer species across the UK. This is the one for red deer. So that's going to be a real big benefit in thinking about a mobile species and how we manage that in terms of woodland regeneration. So, thank you very much, and do please get in touch with me if you have any great ideas.